Welcome to the Inspired Caring podcast, where women who are in the messy middle of this big, beautiful, and sometimes chaotic life are finding inspiration and resources to care for themselves and figure out the best options to care for their aging loved ones. How we take care of ourselves today impacts how we are aging tomorrow. This podcast will help you feel seen, centered, and aligned. Everyone that relies on you is so lucky to have you in their life. The Inspired Caring podcast is your reminder that the number one person that counts on you is yourself. Congratulations on being here in this moment. Let's dive in and be inspired. Today on Inspired Caring, I am so pleased to have Aaron Fish. He is the founder and CEO of Trestle and has dedicated his career to senior living hospitality. He is an expert in this field and a consultant to senior living communities. Welcome, Aaron.
Thanks, Michelle, for having me today.
So happy to be having this conversation. Food is a pretty important component.
Yes, very important.
In senior living and how we experience food on a daily basis and at each meal. So I think the first question, I'd love to start with just how did you end up in this space? Because I think it's so interesting, people's backgrounds and how they gravitated towards senior care.
Yeah, no, it is... either you grew up in it, right? Like you started volunteering in a nursing home in junior high and then you just stayed in the industry. Or like me, you kind of tripped and stumbled into it. So I was working in the hotel industry when it was 2003. I needed to move because I had just gotten engaged to my wife and I needed a job, but the hospitality market was just in the pits. There was just no one hiring for hotels or restaurants. So I took a job as a dining room manager at a massive CCRC in Kansas City. And the thought was, when I took that job, I'll use this as a placeholder. And then when the hospitality market recovers, I'll go and finish, get back into my career of becoming the hotel general manager, which was the thought process at the time. Well, long story short, that never happened. I went from dining room manager to 18 months later, director of dining services. The community made a massive shift towards a more hospitality focused experience. My background in hotels was a perfect fit. And from there, I just stayed in the industry, wound up working for that company, but then regional operators in the corporate office, building food programs and trying to really drive home that hospitality forward approach, not necessarily just in food. I started to kind of branch out and try to impact other areas of the operation further in my career. And then 4 years ago, decided that I wanted to try and impact more operators in the industry in a bigger way, and realized that there's a need for smaller operators in that I'll say 12 to 15 communities or less to get the same kind of support that a 50 or a 60 unit operator would need. And so that's when I started Trestle Hospitality Concepts. And that's what we've been focused on, is educating and supporting operators in elevating their experience in their communities.
I love this. You're kind of the pioneer in this space for the industry, because I think people are trending in this direction more heavily now. But I would say in the time frame that you brought your expertise to the industry, it just wasn't really happening. What did it used to be like?
Yeah, it's funny. When I took over way back when, it was very institutional. Like my first boss in senior living, the dining director at the time, she was a institutional background. She worked in schools and hospitals. I think she even had worked for the USDA at a time. And so it was very like cost driven, cycle menu driven, like let's focus on the healthcare pieces. And it has evolved immensely since that time. Really, truly, operators now are dealing with the demographic shift that started to happen with boomers. The first boomers are now starting to get into that early 70s, mid 70s age. And they just have a completely different expectation, not just for independent living, but even when they look at assisted living and memory care and even skilled nursing, they're looking for experience, they're looking for high quality, and really wanting to get that same experience that they've had when they were out and about living their lives.
I think the baby boomers have shifted so many things in our country. They really, and I don't like putting they on folks, but
Right.
generationally, there was a shift from deinstitutionalizing our country across the board in every sector. So I think this was the change that needed to occur.
Yeah. And it's always for me felt like our industry was 5 years behind on everything. Right. And I do think that some of that just had to do with the trends that were being pushed, maybe like think about hospitalities and hotels and restaurants and resorts, and the things that they were doing was not an expectation in senior living, but it is now. And so that as I kind of look back on my career where I would get frustrated that we were 5 years behind, I realized, well, it's probably more a fact of the people we were serving and their expectations. I think it really started to shift when the youngest silents who had boomer children, they started looking at communities, and the boomer children were like, well, this isn't exactly how we want mom or dad to live, and this isn't how we want it to be. And I think there are plenty of operators out there now that have realized that that's such an important piece of the puzzle, and they've really leaned heavily into it.
I feel like university campuses really embraced this concept and ran with it fast. And it would not surprise me if in the future there was a more, especially in those CCRCs, continuing care communities that you referred to. It would not surprise me if there were franchise restaurants available on properties.
Yeah, I worked for, excuse me, I worked for Aramark for a period of time, and they had their own internal brands, but they would sometimes bring in those, um, you know, casual restaurants that you see out on the street. I think a lot of senior living operators are embracing that, especially like you said, the larger campuses, that diverse kind of dining service approach of, well, we need to have casual outlets and fine dining and grab and go. I have a client in Florida. It's a large 500 plus unit campus. And I mean, their program is from top to bottom, all of the above. They've got a coffee shop, they've got a little grocery store, they've got multiple restaurants of different types, they've got a bar, they've got grab and go. And I think what's going to come down the line is that even some of the smaller communities are going to start embracing, some have, but start to embrace this idea of how do we diversify our offerings, where instead of maybe a coffee shop for 40 or 50 people, well, maybe our coffee shop is for like 8 people. And so now there's some flexibility of I can go there and get a meal as opposed to having to go and sit in the dining room and have that full service experience.
I mean, hotels are like that too.
Yep, exactly. So
Yeah.
I think if you walk into even like a, one of those, I don't want to say budget hotels, but you think like a True or a Loft type hotel, they have those amenities like that. And I think those are the kinds of models that you'll see some of the smaller locations, senior living communities start to embrace.
And I think most people appreciate a home cooked meal. So whoever that is in the home that is typically preparing food. But then we also appreciate the idea of takeout. I know there were a couple of occasions where, for whatever the extenuating circumstances were, our chef was unavailable to come in. And so we order takeout. And on
Mm,
those nights, I mean, I would say the residents would be pretty excited about
yeah,
having a pizza delivered.
right. And I think that experience kind of tells you everything you need to know about what we're talking about, right? That having that diversity, having that variety, having that experience, it doesn't always have to be the sit down, the 3 course, 4 course meal, the tablecloth and the fine china. I think early on we would talk about 5-star dining, and people envisioned like that high end restaurant. And so a lot of people would lean into that. Well, that's all well and good, but nobody wants that 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, right?
Mm.
And so I I have talked about on past podcasts and in past conversations about this. I call it the 5-star hot dog, right?
Mhm.
And so it's not necessarily the meal and that high level experience. It's more about the consistency and the quality of what you're putting on the plate in front of them. Is it done well? Is it done right? Are you putting quality and consistency on the plate in front of a resident or a guest, as opposed to the over the top like experience?
And I think quality and consistency are part of an evolving area of focus and effort
Mhm.
for a lot of buildings. And I feel like there's still a lot of misconceptions in the community, being the external community, around what the food is like in assisted living. People are feeling concerned that it's still a really institutionalized menu.
Yeah. It in the unfortunate situation is that they may find one community that hasn't gotten there yet, right? And so they see that experience, and then that's the stigma that they put on everybody. You know, I don't have an exact figure, but I feel confident that it's probably there are more communities that are doing it right and doing it well than not. But just like any other restaurant chain or brand, a negative experience goes so much further than a positive experience when it comes to like that brand recognition and that brand reputation. And I think senior living gets that rap when it comes to food service because of that.
I don't remember where I heard this quote, but it was something I would teach during orientation. If someone has had a positive experience, they have shared it with 7 of their peers, friends. If someone has had a negative experience, they've shared it with 13.
Yeah, that is. I don't know those numbers are exactly right, but that sounds exactly how it goes. I would be surprised if it was actually that close. I would be more likely to say it's probably like 1 in 10 positive and like 15 negative, right? Because it just
Mm-hmm.
feels like everything you see when people talk about it is like they're concerned about food quality, they're concerned about that experience. And so, what are we doing as an industry to kind of change that impression? I think internally, we're talking about it. Like I read articles all the time about this company has done this, or there's a panel at something and they're talking about all the great things they're doing. Well, that's all well and good if you've got, those operators each have 20, 30, 40, 50, maybe even 100 communities. Well, there's 32,000 assisted living communities alone in the United States. And so we're probably touching 20% of them with those operators doing that. So it's a continuing ongoing battle, I think, to get programs where people want them to be and what our prospects and new residents expect.
I'm curious because we obviously have a lot of, we refer to them as stakeholders, you and I. There's a lot of
Mhm.
stakeholders in the building. And at the
Yes.
end of the day, it's the resident that I feel, and I think you do too, is the most important. Like, what is their experience? How are they experiencing food?
No.
And so I'm curious about how to build a bridge between what is going on the plate with who is managing the building and the corporations that are operating it, or the owner operators,
Mhm.
how do we communicate the value and necessity of ensuring that what's going on people's plate is pleasing versus trying to save a buck or cut corners in this area?
Yeah. I think sometimes with the right menu development and the right approach, you can do a little bit of both, right? Like I'll just refer back to the hot dog, right? You would be surprised at how many residents, when you put something like that on the menu, go crazy for it. They're like, man, I've wanted just a really great hot dog, right? And so that's a cost saver, but it's an experience and it's a different type of experience. And from my but from looking back on the operators I've worked with and the clients I work with now, it really is about establishing the right guardrails from that corporate level and getting the corporate team to understand you can't necessarily like dictate down every single aspect, right? You have to create the right processes and tools and procedures that help establish consistency in the program with food, tools to allow the communities to manage a consistent menu, providing right service training, um, culinary training for your staffs in the communities, but then also locally giving them some freedom to be able to go to the residents and understand that, this is a meat and potatoes community. So they're not going to want some high-end seafood dish. They're going to want a really nice piece of meatloaf, and that's going to be what really pushes over the top. And I think a lot of times that can get missed. Operators are thinking we got to control everything sometimes, right? They think about the sales process and operations and how sometimes there's this heavy hand from an operator's perspective. You got to find the balance between the two. There are operators that are doing a really good job of that. I think they're the ones that are kind of starting to set the trend for what needs to happen in the industry.
I'm thinking about when you talk about what people prefer in the building. I'm thinking about a resident council meeting we had, and there was like 30 people in this resident council meeting, and there was a complaint about the potato salad. And I mean, we discussed the potato salad for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then ultimately what it boiled down to was the resident who initiated the complaint, totally legitimately said, well, it's just not like my grandma used to make.
Right.
So this sort of feels like mission impossible in the dining room on how to appeal and
Mm-hmm.
appease all of the different palates. I'm just trying to even think of my own
It,
family of five.
yeah. So the one thing that I will say about this, and this is what I found to be true over and over again, is you have to be consistent with what you're preparing and you have to communicate almost to a fault with your residents, right? Like I would always in any resident council meeting or in a food committee meeting, whatever the process is at your community, the recipe for, we'll say potato salad, this is the recipe for potato salad. I promise you, every single time we make potato salad, it's going to come out like this. And so if I tell Mrs. Jones, well, this just isn't my grandmother's recipe, then we may not be making that for you every single time. However, we've got to also build in ways to do some of those resident favorites, right? So how do you construct your menu in a way where maybe you do like a resident favorites, or we're going to feature, Mrs. Jones's potato salad. Most of the time, what I have found is the communication and consistency piece takes care of like 90% of your complaints, right?
Mm.
If I can tell Mr. Smith that this is my meatloaf recipe, it's going to come out this way every single time. And if you don't like it, unfortunately, I'm going to recommend don't order it. Like I've got a bunch of other options. Choose one of those that night. And Mr. Jones, most of the time, will be, okay, I just don't like your meatloaf. If they really want meatloaf, they want their recipe, you've got to give them that avenue to do that. But the likelihood of it is going to be minimal. I think because we're providing the menu, we're providing consistency, we're telling our residents, this is what we're offering, this is how we offer it, and we are promising you that this is the way it's going to be. Now, if you go to that meatloaf and it is different every single time you prepare it, you lose credibility with those residents. And I think that's a lot of times where we fall off, is because we don't have operators who lean into this idea of preparing consistently the right items, the items that work for our community. You know, that meatloaf, maybe Mr. Jones, well, maybe all the other residents hate it too. So let's change it out. Maybe Mr. Jones has a better recipe. And so maybe we need to update our meatloaf recipe to this. And restaurants do this all the time. And I think people don't realize that, is that if you walk into a Chili's, an Applebee's, a Panera, pick any chain restaurant, you're going to get the same pork chop or the same meatloaf or the same chicken every single time, because across their system, they're using the same recipes. They've verified it, they've qualified it. And that's what we have to do in senior living to build the trust.
That makes so much sense. And I have to say, when I hear consistency, I think like the words that immediately come to my mind are the same and boring. But
yes,
maybe it's two different things.
No, I could see how you might think that. And I could see how residents might think that. The trick, though, is to be consistent in your communication and consistent in, if you're going to create items and repeat these items on a cycle menu or an always available menu, that they come out the same every time.
Got
So
it.
I'm not saying that like you can't add flair and flavor to your menus. I'm saying that when you do add flair and flavor, the next time you do it, it has to be the same.
Got it.
And so if you don't do that, that's when you lose the trust. And that's when you're going to get poor satisfaction scores, because they don't know what to expect from your kitchen.
That's really helpful. I know that when we're talking about older adults, oftentimes people are on a lot of different medications as well. Can that impact their palate and how they are? The word transcribing is what's coming to my mind. But like receiving food.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, one of the really sad facts that I have ingrained in my head is that by the age of 70, we've lost somewhere around 50 to 55% of our taste buds. And so just through the aging process, our palates are changing and evolving. And then you compound that with medications that are going to impact your taste buds or your senses. Your sense of smell is a huge piece of the dining experience. So that's another factor. So it gets really difficult. What I usually tell operators and dining directors and culinary directors is, everybody freaks out about salt. Use a little bit of salt. You got to have that for flavor, but look at like fresh herbs and fresh flavors, because those are going to pop more. They're going to brighten things up, and those will hit the palate better than if you just try to flavor it up with salt. You're going to get a more dull flavor that way. And so we have to be mindful of that for sure. And it may be trial and error as well. I would encourage every culinary director that if you try an item and you think it's amazing and your residents just tell you they don't like it, don't take it personally and just find a replacement and just keep working that menu. You'll eventually find the items that are going to be your regular items. And then when you do those special wow things, those will hit the way you want them to.
I feel like this is completely applicable for people who are caring for a loved one at home as well. You can take out dietary or culinary director and insert family member.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Consistency. It's okay to serve some of the same things. Don't take it personally.
Yeah, especially the don't take it personally, right? Because I think about cooking at home for my family, and when I get negative feedback from my family, they don't like something, or maybe I got distracted and I overcooked the pork chop or whatever it might be. Like, I think I take that a little more personally than if I was working in a community and I had 10 residents tell me they didn't like something, right? Because there I'm processing it different.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a chef might take it more personally, but at home, it's like, well, I just ruined the entire evening for my loved one because I made the meal wrong. And so, um, it definitely is very similar. And I think it's harder too to cook in those smaller batches for one or two or three people than it is for 50 or 60. So, because all of the measurements are different, like you're scaling things down, and that just gets tricky. And so I think it's really, truly, as a family caregiver, I think you can take the same approach of the communication of, well, what are the things you like, can we do things more often? What are the things that you really want to see? And I don't want to say create your own like cycle menu at home, but come up with like that, those things that you can execute well, that your loved one likes, and then sprinkle in the new things so that it doesn't get stale.
I think that's such a good idea. I'm thinking like every week because life is kind of hectic and busy. And as a family member and caregiver, I'm running all over the place. It feels like all the time. So we have Taco Tuesday. Like my mother
Yeah.
in her own home with my stepdad, who she cared for before he passed away, like they just had Taco Tuesday. Um, and I remember when our kids were little, we just had frozen pizza every Friday. Like there was just
Yep.
one thing, less thing to think about.
Absolutely. And to use your Taco Tuesday example, I think that's a perfect way to create consistency, but also add variety, right? Because think about like, what is a taco? It's a protein in a tortilla with toppings, right? And so you can do birria tacos, you can do chicken fajita tacos, you can do ground beef soft tacos, you can do ground beef hard tacos. Like, you can change up Taco Tuesday, and it's less thinking, because I know Tuesday is Taco Tuesday, but I can provide a little bit of change and variety just in that one meal and keep it fresh and keep it new. So as a family caregiver, it's a little bit of that win-win of, I don't think about Tuesdays are tacos, but I want to do something different. What can I do differently?
Yeah. And if people are just looking for, like, if I go to a certain restaurant, there are just certain meals that I want every single time I go there. So I think there's also a little room for, it's okay to just have like a ground beef and cheese with
Yeah.
salsa taco.
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing too, right? Like, and not having had tons of family caregiver experience myself, I would think that one of the things that could be tricky is getting concerned about the complacency and the boredom and the repetition. And so you want to try and create something for them. So I think thinking inside the box, if that makes sense, around like, okay, what can I do differently with this, right? Like that frozen pizza. Well, maybe I'm going to dress it up. Maybe I'll put some cheese on it, or I'll add bacon so it's more, there's more flavor or something different to it, fresh basil on it. Again, we're starting with something simple and easy, but we're adding a little something extra to it. Not a lot of extra work, and it changes the whole dynamic of the meal just by doing that little thing.
I'll tell you, around here, canned pineapple is a favorite for that frozen pizza.
Some people love it, some people hate it, but I think in moderation, it's just fine.
Yeah. So the dining experience for someone living with dementia may be different than the dining experience for people who are not living with dementia. And, I just learned from Teepa Snow at the conference that we just attended together that 2 out of 10 people actually have a dementia diagnosis, which leaves 8 out of 10 people who do have a cognitive impairment or a dementia that is not diagnosed. So, just if something is different around mealtime with your family member or loved one, I think it warrants a little bit more attention. So let's talk about dining with dementia
Yeah.
conceptually, and then about the program that you created for buildings.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I think is important when you think about someone who's living with dementia is they're still a unique individual. I think a lot of times we get in this mindset of, well, dementia is memory loss. And so everybody just gets shoved in a box. And so we can do one thing one way and that fits them. Um, we have to remember that's not the case, right? If you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when you think about the dining experience, familiarity is important, but also thinking about how can I treat this less as a social activity and more as a task that needs to be done. Early stages, it's maybe a little less that, but as they go through the disease process, it really truly needs to become more task focused. Like, how can we keep their attention in front of them? How can we give them the right tools? How can we provide the right color layering for the visual issues that may come up through the disease process? And so thinking about how can we create an experience for them, but that evolves from what we think of as like this fine dining 5-star hot dog experience to it's an experience around the function of eating, the task that is repeatable and is familiar to them every single time they sit down, right? They sit at the same spot, they have their utensils, they have their plate. Like, a lot of this seems a little antithetical to a non cognitive impaired person when their dining experience happens, but it's still the same thing. It's about that experience for them and creating the right environment and atmosphere.
Which is another layer of consistency. Just
Yes.
really being consistent. I know that with my mother-in-law, we had started doing family Sunday night dinners. And so she and my father-in-law would come to our home. And we just got to this point where she would be getting up throughout the meal and going to the front door.
Hmm.
And I thought, this just really isn't working anymore because, in our home, we have 3 children, we had 2 pets. Like, it was just kind of chaotic. The
Yeah.
radio is on. And so I think that sometimes when families walk into a senior living community, especially maybe a memory care, there's potential that they can feel like the environment isn't vibrant and lively enough.
Right.
But really, for someone living with dementia, like, it was just too much for my mother-in-law.
Yeah. I worked with Carrie Albert to develop our dining with dementia workshop. And one of the things that we did when we did that was we actually sat down and spoke to individuals living with dementia about their experience, about their dining experience. And what we found was things that would be considered behaviors that would be negative sometimes were actually them communication and them like protecting themselves. One of the ladies we spoke with, for example, she is on a carnivore diet. She has figured out over time that that's what's working for her now. And so the idea of a pancake breakfast in a
Mhm.
memory care neighborhood sounds like fun, familiar, an activity that everybody would relate to. Well, this lady, if she lived there, would absolutely have a bad reaction, right? It would be a negative to her physically. And she
Mhm.
knows that, but she knows at some point she wouldn't be able to communicate that. And so sometimes it's really about understanding the people you're working with and the residents that are living with you and what their backstory is to be able to create that structured experience for them.
So, to your carnivore diet point, my mother-in-law hated cilantro to the point where she had started telling people she was allergic to it just so that they would ensure she never
Yeah.
ate it. And then there actually became a point in her disease process where she forgot that she didn't like it. And I don't know if her palate also changed, but it became for her, we have all these preferences. And I
Yeah.
think that that's just like this continual evolution for someone, especially with a cognitive impairment. So I think just my point for families is if someone says that they never ever liked something, but then all of a sudden they are willing to eat it, be open to that. And if someone
Yeah.
is like, I love, love, love something, but then they don't want to eat it, be open to that.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to this idea of, even I'll use my oldest son as an example. 3 years ago, if I'd put a carrot in front of him, he would have turned his nose up. He didn't like carrots. Didn't matter how they were prepared, fresh, frozen, cooked, raw, whatever. He wouldn't eat them. 6 months ago, in a culinary class, he cooks carrots, and now he loves carrots. Literally last night we had carrots, and that was the vegetable he ate. And I share that because our tastes evolve over time, right? Well, it doesn't change when somebody gets dementia, right? Those tastes can evolve. And I think sometimes we get stuck with, okay, mom can't have cilantro. She hates cilantro, or she always wants peach pie. That's always going to be their choice. And that may change over time. Taste buds evolve. They may not like the texture. They may not like the way it looks. And so I think being responsive and understanding behaviors are communication,
Mm-hmm.
and then using that as the starting point of, okay, well, if there's a negative reaction to peach pie, well, maybe we should try offering her something else, as opposed to, well, she's always liked it, so I don't understand why she's not eating it now.
And the undercurrent of that, of course, is that this is a devastating disease process.
Yeah.
Um, and we're clinging to what was familiar and what we knew about
Yeah.
someone.
Yeah. The person they were, as opposed to the person they are now. And I think that, like, you're absolutely right. Because it is a disease journey. It's not just, it's just one more thing through that lived life experience, around food, around anything really.
So, how did you and Carrie, let's talk about Carrie and your partnership for Dining with Dementia. Tell us about that.
So we created a 6-hour workshop called Dining with Dementia, Uncovering the Secret Sauce. And so the short version is I had to fill in at a conference 3 or 4 years ago and do a quick 1-hour presentation about dining with dementia. I partnered with somebody else, and it was a good presentation. It filled the box. I had like 2 days to prepare, so it was very basic, but we got through it. And so I myself started working through and trying to evolve the presentation, because I felt like there was power behind it. It had value. We know that dementia, unfortunately, is something that we're seeing more and more of right now. And so how can I, in my little corner of the world, to have an impact and help operators with it? Well, as I was going through all of this, I wound up at a conference meeting Carrie and talking and learning what she does. And as the dementia darling, being someone with a master's degree in gerontology, focusing on supporting caregivers and having all of this knowledge about the disease and how to approach it, how to help caregivers take care of loved ones, it just felt like this is the perfect opportunity to bring in her expertise on caring for those with dementia, and me to bring in the dining pieces and talk about the experiences that we've been able to create with operators and that we've seen success with, and merge the two together into one impactful day.
That's so powerful. So who takes this class?
So anybody that deals with anyone living with dementia, it's geared primarily for operators. We've had executive directors, we've had caregivers, we've had directors of nursing, dietitians, diet techs, literally anybody that is going to be in any way, shape, or form involved with someone living with dementia. Because yes, we talk about the dining experience, but we do spend about half of the workshop talking about dementia and kind of laying some baseline and getting a better understanding of it. And so anybody who's working with those people can be a part of it. We provide CEUs, so NAB, activity professionals, certified dietary managers. We have CEUs available for those positions as well as a part of this, and because we know how important that is for them in their roles. And it's just a great, it's a good day to share. The last workshop we did, we sat down and there were people in the room that were very, very well versed in dementia. They'd been working with those living with dementia for years. And so there was a lot of just sharing and talking, and there were some best practices shared. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the beauty of a workshop is it's not just us telling, there's also that group interaction and what's the takeaway for the entire group.
There's always something to learn. So when we're talking about, let's just take a little example like plates. Share a little bit about what happens with the color of the plate and color of food, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So the first thing I will tell you is immediately people are like, well, colored plates, right? Because you get a white plate and like it's hard to see things unless you've got really bright pops of color. And so you want to have some variety. Well, usually when I say colored plates or people talk about colored plates, the first thing people go to is this Fiesta Ware rainbow of service. And I would tell them to avoid that if at all possible. Because you're causing issues on your end as an operator or a caregiver of like, well, I got to use the yellow plate for the green beans, but I can't put the corn in the yellow plate. So I got to get a green bowl. And so now you've got like all this extra layer of complexity. Whereas a red plate or a blue plate, I personally prefer the blue plate because very few natural occurring blue foods. Mm-hmm. But red is an appetite inducing color. So you can use red. You have to be strategic about things like beets and tomatoes, but you're wanting to build layers of color on that. So it's not just the plate, right? So if you've got a light colored table, then you need a dark placemat, and then you can use a light colored plate. Or you invert that if your table is, dark color or light colored. So it's important to think about the visual appearance of things while being mindful of still being able to offer a variety of foods.
So the key here is you don't want tone on tone. You don't want yellow corn on a yellow plate or red tomatoes on a red plate. Got it.
Exactly. And that's why that Fiesta Ware that people like to use becomes such a problem. Because imagine being a cook in the kitchen, preparing a meal for 25 or 30 residents, and you've got green and yellow and blue and red and white, all of these plates, and you're serving pork chops and mashed potatoes and corn and green beans. I mean, that's a lot of color discrepancy. And you got to think about, I got to plate this well. I got to plate it right. Oh, and by the way, I got to make sure the colors pop the way they need to. It's just one more thing to not have to think about if you think ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think this has been a really valuable conversation. I feel like we've covered a lot of territory. We've talked about some things that definitely people at home can utilize for the dining experience. And then I'm loving asking right now, what's on your, well, first of all, I guess anything in relation to food and food service and dining and hospitality. Is there anything I didn't ask you? Anything we forgot to cover?
I think we've covered a lot. I mean, there's always something to talk about. I think it'll be interesting to see how like technology gets engaged in the coming years. in food and how we do food service, but I think we covered a lot of ground today for sure.
Definitely. Okay, so last two questions are, what is currently on your playlist? What are you listening to music wise?
So when I sit in here in my office and I need to get moving, I tell my friendly device, who I won't say her name, that I want to listen to 90s alternative. I'm having like this like late teens, early 20s, like throwback. My kids are listening to this music too. And so I just put it on and I can just get in my groove and work. So that's my playlist.
I love it. And then just final thoughts for someone who is caring for a loved one at home or someone who has a loved one who is living in senior living. Just any message, final message for them that you think they should hear.
I think, this is not food related, but it is a difficult position to be in. It's tough when it's your job. I supported a brother of mine doing it from afar, and there is so much involved, and, they just need to remember to take care of themselves, right? Because you can't pour into a cup if your cup is empty. And so be mindful of that. And when it comes to food, don't overthink it, right? Taco Tuesday is perfect. Just run with it.
Thanks for being here, Aaron. This is a great conversation.
Thanks, Michelle.